Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 65. As has become the custom, I will begin with something that's timely. A connection to the Parshat Leben mit der Zeit, living with the times, which of course is the expression that the Alter Rebbe used, Leben mit der Zeit. Chassidim didn't understand what it meant, so the Mittler Rebbe explained to live with the time, which means the Parsha that we read in every particular time. 52 chapters a year correspond to the 52 weeks in the year, and every chapter has 7 sections corresponding to the 7 days of each week. And in effect, every day has its particular parsha, a particular section of the parsha. So we're now in Acharei-Kedoshim, and we're also in the days of Sfira, and we are also, as the minig is in the weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, studying Pirkei Avot. And Yesh Neigen, as the Alter Rebbe writes, to continue the study also in the summer months, meaning in the Shabbosim after Shavuos, all the way leading to Rosh Hashanah. So let's talk about that in a Chassidus Applied fashion. One of the most powerful messages in Chassidus in general is captured in this Parsha, Kedoshim, but also Acharei. But we'll start with Kedoshim because it's a Torah where the Teres Keinim, which is the Medrash on Vayikra, says the following. On the Pasuk, Kedoshim tiyu ki kodesh ani. So the Medrash says, Kedoshim tiyu ki kodesh yochel kameni. You would think that it means that you can be as holy as I, because sanctify yourselves. So you would think you could be as sacred, as holy as I. Talmud Leimer, ki kodesh ani, kedushasi l'mayla mikdushaschem. My holiness is higher than your holiness. So that essentially is the Pashta Taich the Medrash. But Chassidus teaches, as the Rebbe brings in a number of places, some Chassidic discusses on the Parsha Neira as well, that you have to read it not as a question and an answer, but b'nechusa. You say Yochel Kameini, not you would think, as a question. No, Yochel Kameini, Taka, you can be as holy as I am. And how's that possible? K'kedushasi l'mayla mikdushaschem, k'kodeshani. Kedushasi l'mayla, my kedusha l'mayla, says the Eibishter, my holiness, my sanctity above is mikdushaschem, comes from your kedusha below. Which of course takes the medrash and turns it into a whole different meaning. But in essence, it captures what Chassidus really contributes. And that is, of course, answers a fundamental question. God is holy compared to us. Does God need to be called holy? When there's only Ein Eid Milvade and there's nothing but the Eibishter, Kemuvin, you don't have to call him Kadosh, there's nothing else. It's only relative to existence. So who sanctifies God? Who makes a Kiddush Hashem? Who lives a life down on earth that when you see that person's life is a dugma chaya, is a living role model, a living example of what Kedushas Elokus, what the holiness of the divine is like? We do that. Like the Maggid teaches on Dam Alamayla Mimoch, also there it says, Dam Alamayla, you should know that which is above you. He teaches, no, Dam Alamayla, that which is above is Mimoch, comes from you. As he gives the example, the Hashem Tzilcha, that God is like a shadow, Kavyochel. A shadow is created by a light. So here the whole thing is turned upside down, and it gives us so many different messages, so much relevant to the theme of this series, Chassidus Applied. Number one, the dignity and the power of a human being. We have the power to either sanctify or, God forbid, the opposite, the divine. To the extent that it's in our power to determine and establish whether God will be present as a holy entity or not a holy entity in the world. Not Chaz v'Shalom that God needs us to make him great, but the fact of the matter is, on this earth, it's the human being, it's the Jew, through his or her behavior, that determines how others will see God. Like it says in the Sifri, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, not just love God, make God beloved, Shetehei Tav Aleichem, that others should, when they see you and how you behave, they'll say, that's a person that is a godly person. That makes God beloved in the eyes of others. And obviously the opposite behavior makes God hated or defiled and desecrated in the eyes of others. So the Kedushasi L'mayla, Mikdushaschem, is number one, teaching us the power that we human beings have, the confidence that God himself in the Torah has in each one of us, to the point that God binds his destiny and invests in us, taking the gamble that we will live up to our highest standards, and indeed Kedoshasi l'mayla, from our Kedusha, create Kedusha l'mayla. Now, of course, Chassidus, you can explain it far more about Barichas, what we accomplish, and of course the big question, does God need us or not, is right now not here the place to discuss, but this is the taich. The second thing in the taich it explains is also our relationship with God. That we, besides being a receiving life and sustenance and blessings, we're also giving. It's a true partnership. That we are true partners. And like a true partner, we have an ability to affect the entire, not just this world, but the entire Seder Shtalshus, the entire cosmic order, all the way up to the highest levels. That Kedushasi L'mayla is Mikdushas, which ties in also with the theme of Acharei-Kedoshim, which is the two parshas this week. Acharei, Bnei Aaron, it refers to what happened in Parshat Shmini, that the Bnei Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, who Bekrevi HaKadosh, they sanctified themselves, and they were consumed by the Eish Zara on the day of the Chanukas HaMishkan and HaMikdash, and they were consumed due to their great passion and ecstasy. And Chassidus cites in the name of the Eira Chaim, rushing into the Acharei-Kedoshim. So now the Parshat comes and says, after what happened there, that tragedy, let me tell you how one enters into Acharei-Kedoshim. And we have the laws of Yom Kippur, of the specific rules and the specific guidelines, how a Kohen Gadol goes into the Acharei-Kedoshim. The Rebbe explains in a number of places, why is it relevant, Teda Melashon Eirah, to each one of us? So the answer is, in Halach, in the end of Shemitah V'Yevel, Hilchos Shemitah V'Yevel, from the Rambam, he says, Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, not just Shevet Levi, but every Jew who dedicates his life, every Kol Ish V'ish Asher Nod V'Libe, as he says. And the Rebbe makes a whole point to say Kol Ish V'ish needs not just Jews, but even non-Jews. There's a powerful series of ha'aros of the Rebbe in Yud Beis Tammuz letters, printed in Chelik Yud Gimel, Chelik Yud Gimel, page 230. If you really want to understand the Rebbe's view on non-Jews, that's a must-read with those footnotes there. And he quotes, and it's all ha'aros, footnotes on this Hilchos Shemitah V'Yevel. And what's the word? That he continues to say that not just Shevet Levi, but anyone who dedicates and commits their life to the divine, to God, has the ability to be Acharei-Kedoshim like the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says that even Akum Shalom Atera is Kohen Gadol Shenichnas Lefnai Lefnim. And a Jew learns is even higher than that. And it's all brought there in those footnotes based on this Rambam to tell you the extent. Now obviously we don't become a Kohen Gadol at Pi Halacha, but it means the Kedusha of a Kohen Gadol, that's the Acharei, the lesson, B'zeis Yovei, that each of us can go into the Holy of Holies, and as Kedoshim says, not only that, Kedushasi L'mayla, we actually control in our hands, controls the destiny of divine holiness itself in the world. And that's, so the lessons are tremendous. There's a powerful sikha from the Rebbe, I believe it's Keirach Tov Shenun, where we know the Keirach, the posuk that the Rambam brings in Sof Shemitah V'Yevel is actually a posuk from Keirach. That Hashem Oneness Chalki, that God is Chalki V'Nachlasecha. It brings it from Keirach, who actually was punished for trying to be a Kohen and trying to usurp the power of the Kohen Gadol Aaron. And the Rebbe asked the question, why bring a posuk from a place where it seemingly contradicts the Rambam? Keirach wanted to be a Kohen Gadol, and the Rambam says everyone can be, and he brings a posuk from Keirach. And the Rebbe's answer is that Keirach's Ratzon was a holy Ratzon. Every person should want to be a Kohen Gadol. The problem with Keirach is how he did it, and it came from Yeshus. But the idea that each of us, through the Kohen Gadol, becomes a Kohen Gadol, just like there's a Moshe within each of us. Each of us has the capacity to sanctify our lives to the point where we become in the level of a Kohen Gadol. That Ratzon was a very good Ratzon of Keirach. That's why the Pasuk is beferish relevant to every person. It was the way that he did it. But the bottom line, taking into what Chassidus messages to us, is the empowerment of the individual. We live in a world where so many of the psychological and emotional maladies of our time are related to people's disempowerment, a lack of control, fear, insecurity, and so many other factors that make people do all kinds of things to compensate for this lack of control. Comes Chassidus and says, you were created with a power, Kadeshim Tiyu Ki Kodesh Ani, Yochel Kameni, yeah, it can be like a level of Kedusha of godliness. That's how much power you have. It's in your hands, and to the extent that you have the control through your behavior to either sanctify or, God forbid, the opposite, even of the highest levels. So your life is not some negligible, arbitrary, optional element. It's an absolute, indispensable component in the scheme of things. So the empowerment of that is really the root of everything else in life, because when a person feels valuable in that sense, feels necessary, feels important and significant, and we don't mean in an egotistic way, we mean it in a dedicated way, that you are part of the cosmic picture and you can change the destiny of things, that itself, that type of empowerment in children and in adults, can be the best preemptive and proactive action, that is best preemptive medicine to many of our challenges. In that context, a letter came to me from Tafshin Yud Beis. I'd like to just read it from the Rebbe that talks a lot about the themes we discuss here. I thought it was good to read. I received your letter. While I'm pleased to read in your letter a quotation about God being the creator of the world, who also guides all its destinies, this very good impression is weakened by the further tone of your letter, where you state that you want to be realistic, quote unquote, based on the prognosis of physicians regarding your condition. In other words, this person wrote to the Rebbe that based on what the doctors are telling him, the physicians, he is pessimistic about his situation. The Rebbe writes, just to show you the confidence, which is an attitude across the board, Chassidus and the Rebbe in particular, in the confidence in what we have in a person's abilities. So the Rebbe says, I want to tell you first, that even from the realistic point of view, we must recognize the fact that very many times the greatest physicians have made mistakes in diagnosis. Moreover, in recent times, we see that new discoveries are made daily in the medical field with new wonder drugs and methods which have revolutionized medical treatment. Secondly, observing life in general, we see so many things that are strange and unbelievable, that to be truly realistic, one cannot consider anything as impossible. So realism, the Rebbe is saying, actually means that nothing is impossible. In a condition which is to a large extent bound up with the nervous system and the resistance of the organism, even medical opinion agrees that the stronger the patient's faith in cure and the stronger his will to get better, the stronger becomes his ability to recover. Needless to say, this is not said in the way of an admonition, but inasmuch as the individual divine providence you have learned of me, and I of you, I think I am entitled to convey to you the above thoughts. The mere fact that you're communicating with me, the Rebbe is saying, which I was privileged to hear from my father-in-law of saintly memory in similar cases. May the Almighty help you to fulfill your promise to work for Torah true movements and to bring up your children in the way of true Yiddishkeit with blessing and hoping to hear good news from you. So though this theme has been repeated many times in the series MyLife Essays Applied, just the Rebbe's words, obviously, always when you hear them straight from the Rebbe, gives even more strength. Tell a person that this realism that some people have is basically one's own limited view and perspective on things. And obviously we go to doctors, we get diagnoses, but never to be pessimistic. There's always powers and abilities that are beyond our imagination. In the context of Kedoshim, we see that excuse me, that even God himself, Kavyachol, the Eibishter Rabbeinu Shalom, binds himself to us. That Kedoshim L'mayla is Mikdushaschem. So of course it's also connected to this period in time when we are between Pesach and Shavuos, when, as I've mentioned, Chassidus discusses, is the Aveda Mata L'mayla. After Pesach, when Nigla Aleim Melech Malcham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Kvedi V'Atzma V'Golam, that God revealed himself, and it was a divine power that lifts us up. Now comes the more arduous work from bottom up of refining ourselves, which is also one of the main reasons why we study Pirkei Yovis, Milsa de Chassidusa, Midas Chassidus, which talks about Derech Eretz Kodma L'Teira. So before we receive the Teira by Shavuos, there's Derech Eretz Kodma L'Teira, to be a mensch. And being a mensch is not just a nice thing, so people see you as a nice thing. Being a mensch, and that is dependent on the Kiddush Hashem that we create. A Chassid, a Id, walks in the street, people should see this is a person that makes God beloved, that's sanctifying God. So Pirkei Yovis teaches not just the laws, but laws also the Fnimishur Sadin, beyond the letter of the law. And that's why it talks about Midas Chassidus, talks about things that are about human behavior, how we appear to others, practical advice, ethical values, and so on. And particularly between Pesach and Shavuos. So all this ties together, and the bottom line is, thou shalt be a mensch. And this is, even though it seems like, almost like, who needs one to say that? The Torah doesn't even have a mitzvah to be a mensch. Even though one could argue that in this week's Parsha, the Ramban says, what's the mitzvah Kedeshim to you? Isn't that every mitzvah is to sanctify you? And so many mitzvahs refer to the Yiskadashtim, Yiskadashim. You do this and you sanctify yourself. Shabbos Kodesh, and there's the mitzvahs of Kashrus and so on, the last Parshas. And the Ramban says that this mitzvah comes to eliminate and very specifically address a particular individual who's obnoxious in the name of Torah, a despicable person, a manuvel b'reshus HaTorah. So you could argue that is essentially the mitzvah of being a sacred person. But Kedeshim to you obviously is more than just the negative, not to be an animal, not to be despicable, but also to be sacred. So it ties right into what Chassidus comes to teach us, as we spoke last week: emotional intelligence, refinement of the emotions, character development, personality growth. All these words, all the modern lingo, goes really back down to Yiddishkeit, comes L'tzaref es Abriya, the whole Torah, and Chassidus particularly, the Shanis Teva Midesav, as the Alter Rebbe wrote to the Tzemach Tzedek, and as a foundation in the whole Aveda. Unfortunately, like everything in life, there's dissonance, where the mind and the heart get disconnected. We may understand and even know what is right, but we don't act on it. So very often we have the battle between mind and heart, and the challenge is to align our emotions, that our emotions shouldn't be intelligent, that our emotions should be aligned and be refined. Not just that we know what's refinement, but to be that way. And that requires really, number one of all things is simas lev, paying attention and focusing on it. If we don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. If we don't talk about it to ourselves, if we don't bring about it with each other, we don't talk about it to our children, if it's not a topic of discussion in schools, where you address midas of a human being, the midas of Adam, whether it's negative midas of kas, kina, taiva, and so on, anger, envy, bullying, being cruel, being insensitive, and of course midas tevis, compassion, empathy, generosity, great graciousness, gratefulness, and so on, then it's not going to become automatically. So Chassidus focuses that the entire idea of learning about the Elokus, learning even about the highest levels, literally the highest levels, it all comes down to one thing. Are you becoming, as a result, a more divine type of person? So you learn about Elokus to become a more type of godly person, living up to our namesake, which is to be created in the image of the divine, Selam Elokim. So the entire Chassidus is coming to teach, even the Haskalah, even the deepest concepts of the highest levels, which talks about Achdus Hashem and divine unity and the complexity of how divine presence exists within after a tzimtzum, and all the different discussions about 10 spheres and Tayu and Tikkun and so on and so forth. All is coming to one thing: to give us, to acclimate us, to align us, to prepare us, and prime us to be more divine type of entities. So the more your mind is immersed in understanding how God creates existence, the more your mind is immersed in how the divine operates, the more you become a divine individual. But with the goal of personal refinement. It all comes down to that. When the Rabbeim speak about Haskalah and Aveda, that's what it comes down to. Now Aveda means working on yourself. Aveda is Aveda Satfila, which is working on your emotions. Ezu Aveda Shabalev Zu Itfila. Many of these things that have somewhat become, I don't want to call it a lost art, but almost lost. So above all is focus. And I'm especially emphasizing it because this is a platform where I want to talk about the things that matter and create this type of focus, or more focus if we didn't have enough of it. Now, obviously the objective is that each of us take this and talk about it. This is something should be table talk. Should be what we talk about in the morning, in the evening, obviously in ways that are palatable and ways that are pleasant, not with a stick and not with gvura. But you make it an agenda, then it starts working. So with that said, let's move right into a new topic, a sad topic, but obviously very consistent with what we're discussing here, and that is the issue of, I don't even like to say the word, but there's no choice, as the Rebbe says, when it comes to halacha, when it comes to talking specifics, you can't just beat around the bush. With the Torah, usually we'll say behemoth she'ena tehera, in order not to speak b'gnusan in any negative way, even about a behemoth. But when it comes to things that need to be spelled out, it has to be spelled out. The thing called divorce. Gerushin in Lashon of halacha and Torah, gittin. So there are a few questions that have come in. The truth is I've been pushing off this topic because it's one of those that I don't find tasteful or pleasant to discuss. But we live in this world, and if Chassidus is going to address our challenges, it has to also address some of the darker and some of the more difficult topics, including this sensitive topic. So question number one, Rabbi Jacobson, I appreciate your ability to speak candidly about a lot of sensitive topics. I am not sure if this is crossing the line, but can you address the rising rate of divorce in the community? It seems more common now than ever. Another question. It seems like today it is more common for a couple to call it quits and seek out a divorce, more common than it was when I was growing up. In the past, did people simply swallow problems in their relationships and just live with it? Whereas today people are less likely to tolerate an unhappy marriage, or is there something else going on? Something new? Are the problems couples encounter today greater and therefore irreconcilable? Question 3. As a parent with a few married children and on the lookout for shidduchim from my others, is there anything I can teach my children to do to ensure that their marriages are strong and eternal? And many other questions in the same light, in the same vein. Is it even a crisis? And if yes, why? And what are we to do? Now let's make this clear. Number one, even if one divorce is already mizbeach made it demaz, the altar sheds tears. So it's not a matter of a numbers game. Even one divorce is already a tragedy. At the same time, the Torah has definitely given that option, but it's a last resort. So I can't speak about statistics, and I don't even want to speak about statistics. First of all, I didn't do any research. Secondly, will it help anybody just having research? The most important thing is when you hear about it, to address it in a way, what is going on and what can we do to preempt? And let me share a few candid thoughts on the matter. This is what I'm going to be saying is taken from a number of different letters, siches and yechidus of the Rebbe. I'll make reference to those that I can make direct reference to. The rest is the general approach. Yes, in the world in which we live, divorce rate is, some say 50%, some say higher. It all depends how you count it and so on. But the bottom line is, it clearly is not a small number. The question is, what makes a marriage work and what makes it not work? And especially I'm speaking now to the communities where we value the concept of marriage as a sacred union, as a sacred contract, with the bracha, the biggest bracha of them all, that it should be a binyan ad ad. Not just an eternal edifice, ad ad, eternal shall be eternal, double eternal. This is considered to be one of the greatest blessings, if not the greatest blessing, of eternal marriage, eternal relationship that in turn brings up children who in turn will marry and in an Ein Sof way, ad infinitum, continue this chain. And this has been the basis, the foundation of Jewish life from the time of Avram and Sarah. You could all go back to Adam and Chava too, but Avram and Sarah, to not just have good lives dedicated to God, but to build homes. L'mana sheyitzava es bonav es beis achrav lasa es daka mishra. Bonav beis achrav. Perpetuate the legacy. And thus, in Jewish life, and though this doesn't need to be said, I'm sure everyone listening knows all this, but sometimes you have to state the obvious. The Jewish life, the cornerstone of it is the home. Not the synagogue, not the schools, the home. The mikveh is the first thing you build in a community. The mikveh, which is Taras HaMishpach, Shalom Bayis, the home. And the home is the center. The holidays, Shabbos, Yom Tevim, all around, perpetuating it to our children. V'gadato levincha from Pesach, ki sholcha vincha, v'shenanton levanecha, etc., etc., etc. Going to Matan Torah, Baneinu Arevim Badenu, who are the only guarantors God accepted were the children. Children are a result, obviously, of a healthy marriage and a family life. And a healthy family life that brings up children who will be guarantors. Just for the record, good sikha to read on this topic. There are many, but especially one I recently read was Shavuos Tavshel Chavtes. Made it sikha about Baneinu Arevim Badenu and the effect that parents have on children. So I would say a must read for any parent and any new couple. The whole comprehensiveness of it. So first establishing the sanctity, the importance. So when you hear about divorce is painful because it breaches. It's a dagger, a wound right in the heart of the essence of this binyan ad ad. the concept of eternity. Two people married, decided to join together. The commitment was an everlasting edifice that would never be compromised, and then divorce comes and just shatters that dream. So its impact, besides the personal and emotional, which is deep, is also on a cosmic level and on a Torah level, very profound. The question is, what is going on when you see that? What happens when you see couples and then you see rising numbers? And I said again, I don't believe it's an epidemic, especially, obviously when more people you hear about it, then others say, hey, this is also an option. And I want to make it very clear, it should not be an option. Of course, the Torah leaves it as an option, but only as last resort. So let's address what are and I'm speaking now from the experience of what I've seen, what I've heard, my own interactions with different people. Number one is the priorities that a person has in marriage. What are the priorities? What are we looking for? If a person's priorities are to have a beautiful spouse, physically beautiful, which is great, and absolutely even from a Torah point of view, important. But if that's the core of it, and the core is material, successful life, making money, having a career, having a beautiful home, living in a beautiful community. If that is the beginning and end of a relationship, and I'm just using an extreme, just to make the point, rest assured that it's sitting on very, very weak foundations. Because all the above that I just mentioned are all temporary factors. Looks change, money changes, careers change. Materialism, by definition, is an insecure reality. It's an impermanent reality. The foundation of anything eternal is based on an eternal ingredient. And that eternal ingredient has to be more than the sum of the parts. Very often, in lectures I give, in different workshops, I gave one for the Learning Annex, which is secular people in New York and Manhattan. And the topic was, is there such a thing as love forever after? And I asked the group, around 50 people, do you believe in love forever after? I was surprised by the response. Only one young woman raised her hand. And the others did not. I was surprised not that only one person believed in it. I was surprised that they were not ashamed to say they don't believe in it, even though some of them were there with their spouses. And we started discussing why. And one person said it very poignantly. Everything in this world dies. Everything erodes and deteriorates and ages. The food we eat, the money we make, the honor we have, and our very lives. We're all mortals. So why suddenly one thing in life called love should be forever after? What about this young woman I asked? Why did she raise her hand? Because she's still young and naive, and she hasn't probably been hurt in relationships, so she still has the dream, the idealism. Now, the guy was right. However, here's the story. And I explained to them that in marriage and relationships, there are usually 3 levels of compatibility. We'd call in Chassidic language, we'd call nefesh, ruach, neshama compatibility. Nefesh is 2 people have physical attraction, have sexual attraction. A very biological, on basic level, on the nefesh level, there's a connection. That, however, doesn't have to make a complete relationship. Then comes ruach, emotional, an emotional connection between 2. You can love the picture of a certain person in a magazine and not have any emotional connection. Ruach, emotional bonding. And then comes neshama, intellectual connection, a respect for the other person's mind, sharing of ideas, etc., etc. So one would say, and as I asked that group, I said, so what do you think about these 3? They said, if I had one of the 3, I'd be happy. 2 out of the 3 is, to me, it would be great. And 3 out of the 3, it would be a miracle. So I said, yes, but there's one more. Because all these 3, as important as they are, they're all changeable. Looks and physical attraction change. People age. And someone else may look younger, more beautiful, more vibrant. Emotional. You can get emotional stimulation, but then you get used to somebody. You may have emotional stimulation elsewhere. And the same thing with the intellectual. Things change. Especially as we mature in age and go through different stages in life and different challenges. So comes the 4th one, and this we'll call spiritual compatibility, where 2 people share a vision. They share something greater than the 2 individuals and their needs. What kind of home do you want to build? What kind of children? When people come into your home, what feelings should they have? What impact will you have in the world? And that's why the chuppah is like a makif, a surrounding factor. This is already you're dealing with Chai and Yechidet, your transcendent elements beyond Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. And that's where the Binyan Adiyat can be built, because spiritual compatibility does not change over the years, because it's connected to the third partner, which is the divine, the Kedoshim to you. Kedushin, from the word Kedusha. You bring in sanctity. It's not just a contract. There's a sacred union. And it's focusing on the priority of a relationship, which is partners to build a sacred space in this world, which is the home. And the home is a Migdash Ma'at, a small temple, and everything in the home is sacred in that fashion. This doesn't mean we're perfect human beings, but that's the foundation. When two people have that, it can overcome many challenges. If they don't have that, they still may be blessed, and their temporary connections may last a long time, but it's sitting on very weak foundations, and always open and vulnerable and fragile. Even with the spiritual compatibility, marriage can be challenging. So it really comes down about focus. And unfortunately, when I hear many times couples who have divorced, who are already thinking of divorcing, who have already divorced, often I see a certain common denominator. Of course, there are cases where it was just not meant to be, whatever the reasons are. But many cases, and I'm not passing judgment, many cases it comes down to the priorities in the first place were not really properly set. And therefore distractions became major monsters because the foundation wasn't there, or at least not embraced by both equally. The focus on externals, the focus on things that are not the primary focus of what a relationship should be like. Midas tevis, two people who are kind to each other. Can you trust the other person? Can you build a life with them? If it becomes dependent on other factors, then two people are never going to get along in every area. So they have to have that common ground, and I find that is for so many, both bochrim and girls. Often you talk to them and you hear what is it you're looking for. So everyone always says a nice person, a beautiful person, someone I'm attracted to, someone that's kind, and so on. But you don't always hear that spiritual dimension. And I don't mean a sophisticated spiritual message. I mean a focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals, frankly, are not that complicated as one thinks. Fundamentals means, as I said, a person that is kind, a person that's sensitive, a person that has bittul, humility, someone that listens, and respect, and you know that you can build a partnership with this person. That whatever comes your way, you'll be able to build with this person. Now we have a lot of distractions in this world, whether it's sexual distractions, whether it's financial distractions, whether it's impressing others, social distractions, social status. Once they begin to spill into relationships, you're asking for something that is going to be almost impossible to overcome. Again, God can bless and people can stay in marriage for children and convenience. But the ingredients of eternity is something that what we must inculcate, we must infuse from the earliest of ages. Obviously, in early age, you're not talking about marriage, but you're talking about the focus. And above all, you are a soul that came to earth to fulfill your calling. So if someone were to ask you a question, if you were to leave one thing in this earth after Mei V'Esrim Shana, what would be the thing you would choose? What would you like to leave in this world? I'm not going to answer the question for anybody. Ask yourself that question. Any new couple, any potential couple, anyone considering shidduchim, ask yourself that question. The Torah answer, in general terms, is that you fulfill the calling for which you were sent to this earth. If you answer that, and that truly is the single most important thing, and you're looking for a partner to join your two callings as pla gufa, as two soulmates, or one soul, two parts of one soul toward a calling, you're on the right direction. If calling is meaningless to you, whatever reason, and your answer is to leave a lot of money to my children, or to make a name for myself, or to build a successful business, even to make a better world, which of course is part of the dedication, can be sometimes too vague. So it's critical to have these priorities in place. And these priorities in place begin at an early age. They don't begin when you start dating. They begin when you're far younger than that. Obviously, when it comes to dating, you need guidance in this direction, and this is the focus that you try to bring two people together. And that becomes overriding over the differences that people have, and we all have differences. Sometimes spouses can be very opposite in their emotional and intellectual makeup, even in their compatibility. But the shared calling and the shared communication about it is one of the most critical components. Again, not to take away or dismiss any of the others. Now, to be more specific would require going case by case, and every case is a different story. But I go back to the sanctity, going back to the appreciation of what marriage is, what a relationship is, and yes, it is, and to fight for this relationship. I don't know how it was in previous generations, but I will say this: there's no question that people had less options, and therefore it wasn't an option just to divorce because it was inconvenient. Today it seems to be an option. There's no question in my mind that that's a problem. Why was it a non-option? Maybe because people had less, and they were satisfied to have their lives were not about material abundance or jealousy or envy of the neighbors, so they focused on the basics, the basic fundamental principles. Whether there were marriages that didn't work then and people stayed together anyway because of the stigma or other reasons, possible. But there's no question that when you have more options and you think in the name of your luxury, in the name of your comforts, and our comfort zone becomes the single most important thing, then as soon as you're a little bit uncomfortable, of course, hey, why do I have to be uncomfortable? And hey, I have a friend who's done it, and he's moved on. If comfort zones become that priority, which was not the center of life in previous generations, we also have a challenge. Now, people should all be comfortable. The question is what you worship and what is the single most important element or the single most important elements in a relationship. And sadly, many of them are about, as I go back to distorted priorities or some type of distortion in priorities. I'll share, I counsel different couples and sometimes officiate secular couples as well. So I usually obviously speak to them about the foundations of Jewish life, which is of a Jewish family life, which is Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras Mishpacha. Of course, many other matters, but those are three real family-oriented pillars. And I always suggest, as a suggestion, since you're starting a new marriage, I suggest why don't you designate once a week the couple choose an evening for an hour, study something together, study some Torah, something in Chassidus, something that speaks to both of you. And no matter what, stick to that. Why? Because once life takes over and once the honeymoon is over, there's to have that type of anchor while you're both busy and doing other things, always has a place you come back to. Besides Shabbos, obviously, which is a great way as well to keep people, in a sense, committed, and it's not an option but a necessity. And the second suggestion I often make is host something once a month in your home. Have friends come over, have a little party, have someone speak, have something read, things like that. Obviously, more the merrier, but those minimum. A number of years ago, I suggested this to a couple, and they got married, and everything was fine until things were not fine. To the point that recently they told me that they got to a point of such tension, such battle, they wouldn't speak to each other. But since they made the commitment to study together Thursday evenings, even when they didn't speak all week, Thursday evening they would get together and do that studying. And they said that saved their marriage. Everything else was gone because they were angry for this thing, for that reason. But this thing kept the glue together, something greater than them, the commitment to study. And they said they were able to rebuild based on that because that started to spill over. They had that connection. So when all else failed, they had that connection, just to give an example. I can go on this topic, and it's, as I said, a painful topic, but it's again something with simas lev. Unless we pay attention to it and preempt, we, God forbid, can suffer consequences. And I'm not saying that as a curse, I'm not saying that as a prediction. I'm just speaking as cause and effect, the normal wear and tear of life. Now, of course, as parents, and answering one of the third question is our own role modeling. Remember, our children learn about marriage from their parents. A healthy, good marriage most likely will create a model that the children will emulate. And a bad marriage, where there's fighting, where there's arguing, where there's cold war, where there's no relationship, no respect, and all the other abuse that can come from a relationship in a home, the children pick up everything. So it's our marriages ourselves are the best thing we can do for our children's marriages. This doesn't mean it's airtight, but it means it's the single greatest factor that can help shape our children's attitudes. I know that puts the burden on the parents. Well, so be it. That's exactly what parenting is about. It's not just about bringing children into the world, it's also modeling for them what Kedoshim Tiyu means. what it means to be a sacred person, and that plays itself out mostly, of course, in marriage itself, because that's where the best and the worst comes out. Having a selach harav, a mentor, so when there's times of tension or crisis, to nip it in the bud and not wait till it gets out of control is another important factor. A couple, young couple or older couple, should have someone to speak to. They can vent, they can air it out, they can, as I said, bring some fresh air, so don't allow any infection to fester. Because festering infections, especially in the area of domestic relationships, shalom bayis, can become something small that could have been prevented, and then it becomes something so big you can't do anything about it. So it's critical to have that component as well. And then having influence of friends. We have to have friends. Acquire friends that are healthy relationships. Being around people whose relationships are rocky doesn't help someone else who's in a relationship, because then this is what you see as modeling. You see this as an example. Having confident people, people who know how to love each other, people who have the capacity to listen, people who can even have a disagreement in a decent and cordial way. These are friends that we want to have around us, especially when we're challenged, because they can help us look at them and see advice of how to resolve issues. And the list goes on and on and on. But we cannot sit back and just say, hey, another divorce. No. Every divorce doesn't have to hit home, your own family, to wake up. Every divorce is a tragedy for the entire Jewish people. As I said, there are halachic reasons sometimes. There are other reasons that may be necessary. Necessary as the last option. I'm not dismissing that, but that is a far small percentage of most of the divorces. So we have to see it as a wake-up call. Not as how terrible things are. A wake-up call. What's going on with our marriages? What's our attitude and our priorities in life? How are we looking at a family, children? What ultimately is your tachlis in this world? What are you going to be doing with your life? And sadly, as you look at that, you'll see the priorities are in the wrong places. Many people's priorities is making money. Everyone should be blessed with a lot of ashidus and wealth. But if that becomes your priority, per se, it may not cause damage a moment, but it just shows where your passions are. And therefore your passions and attention is not going to be in the other areas of a person's life. And of course the sanctity. You're a chassid of the Rebbe. You're a chassid of the Rabbeim. You're God's chosen Tselem Elokim. Are you living up to the divine mandate for which you were blessed? The greatest thing that you have is to be that shliach, that ambassador, that agent of the divine in this world. Are you a divine agent? Again, we all have Yetzer Haras, we all understand temptations, but to know that that's the core bottom line. In the morning, you're acknowledging, I am a divine agent, and my contract was renewed this morning. Have that attitude. This is what Chassidus teaches us. Chassidus Applied is about teaching us that you are a divine agent, and everything you do in your life, and especially your marriage and your family and your home, is the platform. This is the corner of your world. Acharei-Kedoshim, that this is what you're going to be judged for. And I don't mean judged as in judgment, but I mean this is what you're accountable for. What have you done with that Acharei-Kedoshim that you were given and blessed with? And this is something we need to reinforce within ourselves, within others. And Ishas Echav Yazeru, Ishas Re'ei Yazeru, Echav Yemer Chazak. We have the power, the synergy of bringing and giving each other strength in this area. Certainly there'll be more questions on this topic, and we'll definitely address them. I will stop with this because there's more to talk about. Let's go to the next one, women taking a public role. Women taking a more front role in communal life. Why in Chabad do women rarely give speeches to a mixed audience? And why are they not more actively dominating the public sphere? If women have so much to give, why can't they do it more publicly? I understand that women are most honored in private, but is there anything wrong with them taking a more public role? I'm a woman and this disturbs me. Well, first of all, let's make it clear, as I've said a number of times. The Rebbe made it clear that from the beginning of his leadership, without getting into the whole discussion of why in this generation, that women are not just meant to be housewives and mothers, but also meant to be activists, Shei B'nai Chabad, to affect and influence and be part of the revolution of transforming the world with Chassidus and Torah and Yiddishkeit. all shluchim, the Rebbe saw the shlucha, the wife, as being not just a wife and an adjunct, but being an equal partner. At the same time, part of Yiddishkeit, talk about Kedoshim to you, is based on a sanctity, and sanctity includes dignity. We've talked many months ago about Tznius Applied. Tznius does not mean something ugly or something to be hidden or something about repression. Tznius is dignity. So instead of looking at the world for standards, especially in the areas of sexuality and femininity and masculinity and so on, the Torah gives us standards. What does it mean to be a dignified human being? And a dignified human being is appreciating the subtlety of Kvuda Bas Melech Prima. A woman's feminine energy is an intimate energy, and therefore, with all her role as being an activist, there are, as the Rebbe always says, be done in the right halachic and tznius-dik way. Again, I want to focus on the word tznius. Unfortunately, elicits in most people a knee-jerk reaction of a very, almost a disgusting reaction. Tznius, again the tznius. Tznius police. Because unfortunately, people who have monopolized the discussion about tznius do it in a very non-Torah-dik way, sometimes even a non-tznius-dik way, I should say, and a very aggressive and ugly way, and talk about it more about provocation, and in ways that turn people off, that make you think that anyone that's about tznius is a prude. Anyone tznius-dik is not sophisticated. They're talking about the fear of provoking, and women have to be hidden and covered, and so on and so forth. Tznius is chiyuv. It's about the dignity of the human race, and it's equally relevant to men as it is to women. So the discussion of a woman in the public role has to be always taken in that context. So absolutely, Chassidus teaches, and the Rebbe particularly, that women have a leadership role, not just in the home, but in the community, particularly for other women. A woman not speaking to a mixed audience, usually halachically people avoid doing it for different reasons, and above all, the dignity. And if you think about it in a positively dignified way, you're going to give a whole series of explanations for it that have nothing to do with what most people think is being primitive and being, why can't a woman just say something to communicate to the public, and so on and so forth. Now, there are obviously many instances, especially in Avot where women have spoken to mixed audiences, and it was also with the Rebbe's acceptance. It's case by case, but always done, not just taken for granted, but always done with discretion for the reasons that I'm mentioning here. Let's not underestimate the world in which we live, where the sexual boundaries between the genders have been almost completely abolished. What's going on in the media and in the world. So we don't have to be naive. We understand very well how the world does not have standards and a good, healthy modeling of this. So part of our modeling and part of our leadership is to demonstrate that. In the Beis HaMikdash, the holiest place in the world, there was Ezras Anoshim, there was Ezras Noshim, there were the Koyanim, or there were Levim. So distinctions and sections are not necessarily mean some type of negativity. It's simply respecting the structure of the human race. And just like there's women's tennis and men's tennis, and just like there are different structures for different segments of the population, it's not seen as some type of discrimination. It's seen as recognizing the value of the structure. And everything in life has a structure. There's an air pipe, a wind pipe, and a food pipe. Each has its role. So that's the answer to the question. They absolutely do take a public position, in a way, however, that is completely consistent with the dignity of the tznius of Torah and halacha and so on. A few follow-ups. Since we're talking about that, let's do one more why wife doesn't daven feedback. Hi, thank you for your weekly webcasts. I always find them practical, meaningful, and inspiring. I just wanted to share from the perspective of a woman about davening in relation to the topic discussed in the past 2 episodes. I only heard the second episode when you brought it up for the second time, and not the first one, so perhaps what I'm writing will be superfluous. Before I got married, I would daven every day. For me, after marriage, my davening changed form. In short, we were blessed with 3 children within the first 4 years of our marriage. Many things changed, along with having a few little kids, pregnancies, newborn babies, etc. And one of the things is the way I daven. I very rarely formally daven from a siddur, the way I used to when I was single, but that doesn't mean I don't daven. I speak to Hashem throughout the entire day. I thank Him when the baby goes to sleep without a fuss, and I'm able to get a few things done. I pray for patience when I'm challenged by a child's behavior. When I wake up after a sleepless night, I pray that even on hardly any sleep, I'll have the energy to get through the day. I daven to Hashem as I drive my kids to school and as I prepare dinner for the family. I might not be holding a siddur in my hand and reciting the prescribed text, but I daven. In my own words and in my own time, I thank Hashem for His blessings and request what I need for myself, my family, and Klal Yisrael. There's a reason certain mitzvahs weren't given to women, and perhaps this man's wife isn't davening in the same way as he does or as he expects. Perhaps she is davening in her own way, in her own words, at her own time. Hatzlacha, may all our tefillos be answered. Beautiful. This comment speaks for itself. I have nothing to add. And a very excellent feedback. Thank you for whoever wrote this. Again, anyone who wants to submit questions or feedback, please go to meaningfullife.com/mylife. Okay. Next follow-up. And then we will get to the essays for this week. The next follow-up will be seeking spirituality outside of Judaism. This was a discussion in episode 63. I enjoyed your insight as they are well-developed and wholesome concepts. Your insights as they are well-developed and wholesome concepts. I do understand your inclination to validate a firm person's thirst for looking into other spiritual type sources. However, I found the Rabbeim and their writings as well as the writings from general Torah sources to not show as much flexibility as you were inclined to do. They didn't allow any kind of permutated straying with a built-in excuse that when I do tshuva, it will be a more complete tshuva. To say that someone who has trouble understanding or applying Chassidus is now somehow capable of using other forms of spiritual mediums as a kardum to further their knowledge or lack thereof in Chassidus does not jive well. I feel like you went a little soft on spiritual seekers. If someone already comes from that world is one thing, but we should have a zero tolerance policy for insiders. I don't see any flexibility in the Mishnah Gemara versus in davening Mamorim or Sichos at all. Bittul Torah is forbidden. Fear of heaven is a constant theme. And Chassidus teachings, they always seem to want Kedusha and Bittul and your whole being for that matter. So where are you getting your iffiness from? If we dance around right and wrong for our children, our children will have less respect and perhaps a smaller chance of returning back to Torah spirituality down the road. On a different note, you challenged me in the past by saying to me that if I have such moral clarity about an issue, then what are you doing about it? At first, your comments were upsetting because it felt irrelevant to my argument. However, as I pulled back, I appreciated the kick in the pants, and I involved myself in doing a shlichus type project that I hope will make a significant difference for the good. Thank you. Okay. Another feedback regarding the issue of spirituality outside of Judaism. Although all of the answers to life's challenges are in Torah in general and Chassidus in particular, it can often be difficult to find and trace the solution to these specific issues in Torah. Would it be acceptable to study psychology or other philosophies and work backwards to trace its source in Torah Chassidus in order to directly deal with an issue the way psychology recommends to, but still according to Torah? And finally, about the guy who doesn't feel that Tanya addresses his issues, why don't you say, when the Alter Rebbe writes in his introduction, Gedalim Shebir, if you can't find in Tanya the answer, go to the Gedalim, as I described Gedalim as being the mature people in your community. Secondly, say impossible. Istaku b'raiso bar alma. God created the world by looking into the Torah. Therefore, we're not given anything we cannot accomplish. So the truth is definitely in Chassidus. And if you're missing it in Imreiku, it's because you haven't found it. You want to discover the truth elsewhere? Be my guest. But bring it back to Chassidus. Okay, with a limited time, we don't have a lot of time, I want to just say the following. And I'll elaborate on this in the coming week. By no means that I suggest that a person l'chatchila should go outside of Chassidus, because the whole point of this Chassidus Applied is obviously to demonstrate and show that Chassidus has all the answers. After the fact is one thing. Before, and if someone came to me, the first thing I would do is, let's learn a Maimar Chassidus. Let's sit down and let's find it. I also acknowledge that it has not yet been developed enough. The 530 essays, actually, is an unbelievable stepping stone, unbelievable state that I hope will lead to many more where we will create a revolution in our community and in the world of Chassidus and Chabad and outside of it, to take Chassidus and apply it to everything in life. But we have now a reality that's not yet completely there. So there's no question it's all there in Chassidus. I say it unequivocally. I have no doubt about it. Does that mean that when you talk to a psychologist and you know Chassidus, can you learn from it? Of course, we learn from everything. Everything is a Heirah and Avedis Hashem. However, I was trying to address a person who's actually seeking in a community. So if they come to you, that's what your job is. But if they're already reading other stuff, to just start yelling at them. Stop reading other stuff, because it's all in Chassidus. Even if they listen to you, which most likely they won't if they're an adult, what have you accomplished? Okay, they're not reading any more of that. Now what? Are you spending the time and teaching them now how it's in Chassidus? This is where it gets more complicated. And I'm not giving a black and white answer. The best is to try to do, again, look for an Chassidus. But to invalidate a person seeking and looking in different places because they're hungry is complicated, because you may not accomplish anything. So you could tell them, absolutely, it's in Chassidus. You know what? Let's work in that direction. What do you do with an adult who's pursuing other approaches because they can't find it in their own backyard? I don't know what to say to that. Because we don't have the power to enforce anything, and we shouldn't even have to enforce. It's a challenge. Now, we're talking about a 10-year-old child, it's one thing, but you're talking about a 25-year-old adult is another. So that's where I wouldn't call myself being lenient or soft. I was being respectful to a person and saying, you can find that in Chassidus. Meanwhile, you're reading that. At least do it like the Rebbe said with TM in some kosher way. It shouldn't be Avodah Zarah, God forbid, definitely not. It shouldn't be tainted in any ways that are really antithetical to Judaism. There are many Jews, many Chassidim as well, that have studied psychology in school. Psychology has parts to it, especially Freudian and other types of psychology, that are antithetical to Judaism. So, those are part of the risks. A person who goes into that field and wants to become a psychologist or a social worker, they need to get a degree, they'll need to do that studying. But if they have a strong foundation of Chassidus, they'll know how to pick and choose and make it a kardim lachtachbe. That's what I want to say right now. Because of time limits, I'm going to stop with this and I'll talk about this some more. That's my Bli Neder pledge. Let's go, as we've done, concluding with 3 essays this time. 3 MyLife Chassidic Essays, Chassidus Applied Essays. We'll start with the essay titled Mending Broken Vessels, Healing Parenting Advice. Authored by Dina Hendel, 33 years old, a shlucha in Jerusalem. Another beautiful essay where she begins by saying, how do I deal with a challenging child? How can I educate a resistant student? How do I reach out to a rebellious teenager or adult? And perhaps most personally, how can I rebound when I feel disillusioned or disappointed with myself? And then she goes into an entire discussion based on the Alter Rebbe in Teirei and Vayishlach, talking about Toyu and Tikkun, Yaakov and Esav. And Yaakov bowing to Esav because Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, was too much intense energy that scattered it all over, and he was gathering the sparks again. And she applies the concept of too much energy with lack of kelim, lack of containers, and creating that tikkun to dealing with people and these challenging situations. So just to read, a major part of dealing with challenging children, students, and adults is understanding them. When we recognize their great potential, meaning that energy, that eris merubim of teyu, the intense energies of the world of chaos, we will view them more positively and we will seek to provide them with appropriate outlets for their energy and talents. We must avoid the shattering of vessels at all costs, because when a person doesn't have a channel for his or her energies and talents, he or she becomes a risk of finding negative outlets or even addictions to fill this need. Now this essay, as the others that I've been reading, are all posted now online at themeaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. And you can read it more in detail. And then she goes to 3 meditations to keep in mind when dealing with a challenging child, student, or adult. Recognize they have great strengths. Remember, they were given to have a positive outlet, and then they may have fallen into something negative. I'm sorry, these energies weren't given a positive outlet. So recognizing they're positive, recognize they weren't given a positive outlet, and then how do you rectify the breaking of the vessels based on the Mamorim, on Toyu and Tikkun, and other places that she cites. She also applies this to how to parent ourselves, using the same 3 steps, and finally brings Reish Lakish, the story of Reish Lakish, who was a thief, and Rabbi Yochanan told him 2 words that would change his life. Chilcha la'araisa, may your strength, that power that he was a tremendous gibber, and used for crime, your strength should be used for Torah. When he realized that, Reish Lakish, that's what turned things around. And then she concludes, I am blessed that my rambunctious 5-year-old son has a nurturing teacher who models this Chassidic method. The other day he told me proudly, my teacher believes in me. Beautiful conclusion. Okay, now let's go to the next one. Again, time is limited, so I'll be brief. This one is Oneness, fascinating essay, written by Michal Goldman, Shliach in Hawaii, on Oneness, age 40. It's based on the Maimer in Ayin Beis, the Maimer of Shavuos Tafresh Ayin Hey, which is 100 years, coming up 100 years in a month from now, literally a month. And it's about, the essence about oneness. And he basically says this essay will discuss the Chassidic theme of oneness, displaying the foundational shift and profound impact this seemingly abstract concept has when taken from the realm of the conceptual to the experiential. It is literally life-changing. It talks about Achdus al Chassidus is not just there's one God, but there's one reality. And goes through a personal experiences of his own compartmentalization that he found as a student. And his personal life, growing up in South Africa, and very, very relevant, and then applies the concept of what he calls the duality of oneness, that Achdus Hashem is not about eliminating distinctions, but embracing the diversity that exists in reality, and understanding that these are all facets of the divine. And he does an excellent job of explaining the Ayin Beis Maimer, Shavuos Ayin Hey, as I said, and applying it to the oneness. And he does it in both within God. You find the revelation of God, the concealment of God, like Yom Echad, unity, Yom Echad. So Yom Echad consists of Yom and Laila. So night and dark couldn't be more antithetical, and yet they're part of one Yom, one Echad. So within God you find revelation, Gili and Tzimtzum, light, Eris and Kelim, Gvul and Bligvul, Havaya and Elikim. Within Torah, Nigla and Chassidus, the written and the Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah and the oral Torah, positive and negative mitzvahs. Within the universe, light and dark, heaven and earth, spirit and matter. And within the human, soul and body, divine soul and animal soul, male and female. He even brings a fascinating footnote about binary coding, which Leibniz established in the 17th century, and connecting the zeros and ones also to this seemingly dual. But they all become part of oneness. Applying that can make us look at the world in a completely different way, even things that seem to disagree with each other and come from different directions. And finally, we'll do the final essay for this week, the MyLife Applied essay contest, and that is an essay by Tzvi Lipchik, 40, Yeshiva Chekli Yisrael, assistant to Principal Chevei Torah in Brooklyn, New York, titled Against Our Nature but the Ultimate Pleasure. And he begins, if you would ask 1,000 people, what is something you wish that you didn't have to do and you hate doing, but you do it anyway because it is necessary? You would probably get some interesting answers, but one answer which you would not get is nothing. Everybody does things that they wish they didn't have to do because of responsibility. And he goes into a fascinating discussion on this concept of, based on the Maimer Tavshin Lamed Aleph, the Tu B'Shvat Maimer, Arba Rosh Hashanim Hem Tavshin Lamed Aleph, printed in Sefer Mamorim Melukotim, Volume 5, to understand the reason that many of the obligations we do is contrary to our nature. Why do it have to be contrary to our nature? And he sums up the reasons: to refine the person, to have the Kabbalah sale, and because it should be ultimately your effort. And then applies it to dealing with challenges in our own times. When we have challenges, instead of avoiding them, embracing sometimes things that are, like he writes, controlling one's appetite and eating healthy food are challenges for most of us, and a source of frustration and stress for people of all backgrounds, ages, socio-economic status. Scientists such as Stephen Witherly also ask, why are we biologically more attracted to foods which could give us health problems, and why is our nature to eat much more than our doctors would recommend? The answer they give don't give any advice or strategy to control the problem and could lead to a sense of despondency. And by Chassidus, on the other hand, he says, the plan outlined above of using Chassidus meditations to change one's perspective about difficult challenges, while not necessarily will it lead to weight loss, but will go a very long way to combat the stress and frustration about having a stomach that tells me to eat cake and a doctor who tells me to eat celery. And he goes 5 steps, and he outlines and applies Chassidus, recognizing that eating is a healthy mitzvah, eating healthy as this is designed to be difficult for me, and how the reasons why the difficulty itself is part of our person's growth. Again, this is an essay all of you can read, meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. And this will be the review of the essays we did this week. Every week we're going to be dedicating a segment that will be focusing on other essays. We'll try to announce beforehand and send emails, hopefully to the people who wrote these essays so they can be ready that we'll be talking about them and share it with their family and friends. And the point of all of this is to continue the momentum that MyLife Chassidus Applied contest created. Tremendous momentum of so many people from all walks of life, from all over the world, writing essays of applying Chassidus to life. The Hira that we found in the Rebbe's letter of Chof Tevis, Tovshin Tezvav, 60 years ago, that there's the girls, but it's to write essays on Chassidus, on the work of the Rabbeim. What better way of doing your futzah meinesecha chutzah in a real, tangible, concrete way? And our hope and prayer is long before we do everything we can do to finally create a revolution that will have a ripple effect. Chassidus applying it to life, to our personal lives, to our families' lives, to our children's lives. Kedoshim tiyu. We're here as divine agents to sanctify. We need to feel that type of power, that proactive and preemptive initiative that each of us must take when we behave that way. As they say, be busy living instead of busy dying. When each of us initiates, that's how you create movement and that's how you create change. Hashem should bless us all that we should achieve this in this week of Acharei-Kedoshim and the week of Chodesh as we continue the journey toward Matan Torah. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 65, every Sunday from 8 to 9 p.m. Until next week, everyone have a gebenched and a blessed week.